Hi guys, welcome back to this week's video. Or should I say this channel? So in this video, I'm going to go through how I made this Silverback gorilla commission. It's probably one of the most elaborate dolls that I've done. A lot of the content is going to be over on my Patreon just because it's a lot of experimentation. So I'll be sharing that over on my Patreon for my $5 and up tiers. But there will be, the normal process will be over, this will be my normal process. So yeah, a little bit of a different kind of doll that I normally do. I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out. I'm really glad I got this commission because, you know, it was a challenge to do something out of my comfort zone. I usually do four-legged wolves and foxes and like creatures like that. So it's really good to get something that is completely different, a primate even, and I'm really happy with the way the face turned out, if you can see. So the hair turned out really well, and yeah, really happy with the way it's turned out. In the chest area, so the chest area will be its own separate video on how I did that over on my Patreon. I've already got the sculpting video up on my channel, and also the sculpting the hands and feet as well. So that's on my channel already if you haven't seen that. And how I did the body will be its own separate video as well over on my Patreon. But yeah, everything else will be in this video. So yes, I hope you enjoy watching it.
Alrighty, so if you haven't already seen my video on how I sculpted the head of this gorilla, you can find it over on my channel. I'll try and remember to link it, but I never remember it. So I sculpted this out of Sculpting Original, and I used some glass eyes and incorporated a ball and socket armature inside. A little bit of a closer look. You can also find how I did these wrinkles over on my Patreon as well, so that is available for my $5 and up tiers. But over on my YouTube, or over on YouTube, you will see how I sculpted the entire head and using the original Sculpey original. So if you want to know how I sculpted that, you can head over to my videos page and you can find it on there. So same deal with the hands and feet as well. You can find that over on my YouTube again. It is available for free, and this time I used some Sculpey Original. It means it's a little bit stronger, but if you want to know how I sculpted these hands, you can head there as well. So moving on, after I've sculpted everything and baked and it's ready to go, I can then start painting. So with the gorillas, they obviously are all black, so I started off using a acrylic water-based paint, and I'm just going over my sculpture with that paint, being careful around the eyes. The good thing about using glass eyes is you can sort of paint over the glass and scrape it off after it's dried, so there's no permanent paint on the eyes, but I always tend to be a little bit careful when I'm painting around the eye area anyway. So I'm putting the base layer of paint down, just so I'm doing it all over the head, just so there's no see-through of the white when I go to apply the faux fur onto the head. So yeah, wanted to make sure it has a good coverage, and with the polymer clay, I would recommend putting a primer down, and that way it helps the paint to adhere to the actual surface of the clay. I use a primer from Derivian Matisse, and it's just a canvas primer that you use to prime your canvases before you paint, but it works really great on resins and clay as well. I've never had a problem. And the same deal for the hands as well, using the same paint and stuff. So it's probably a bit smarter to use a bigger brush than what I did here, but I just tend to go along and get sort of stuck in the zone, but no big deal anyway. And as you can see, I've already got the ball and socket armature attached as well. I got a big delivery of the armatures, so I have to sort of go through the box, itemize them, and see what I want to put onto my shop. So I'll probably put a small amount on before I put a larger amount, just to see how it goes. But anyway, yeah, just finishing off the paint work and letting it dry, and also dropping it and getting it all over your hands as well. And so yeah, same deal with the hands. The reason why I use Sculpting Original, it was because it's a little bit harder, bakes a little bit harder than a Sculpting Original. So as these are smaller parts, I wanted something a bit stronger, but the same deal, painting it with that acrylic black paint. I didn't prime these ones, so Sculpting Original is pretty good, and doesn't normally need priming, but you can if you like, there's no harm done. But for this one, I sort of welcomed a little bit of transparency to the hands anyway. Yeah, just using the same paint, and I always do a couple of layers of paint as well, just so there's a nice coverage. You don't want it too thick because then you start losing details in your sculpture if that's something that you're worried about. So I'd always recommend not using a really thick paint, and just doing some thin coats of some thin paint as well. Moving on to the body, so this body process will be over on my Patreon, but I just wanted to give you a quick look at what it looks like when I finish this whole process. I'm not sure which video will go up first. I think I'll do the chest experiment first over on my Patreon, but then this one will come in the following weeks, and I'll go through how I got to this particular body, and sort of what techniques I used for the body as well, including sewing, the faux fur on, and just all that sort of mumbo jumbo. So if you're interested in that, you can get it for $5 and up over on my Patreon in the coming weeks. So for the faux fur that I use, it's just a simple black faux fur, and it's very, very similar to gorilla fur as well. It's just a little bit long. So same deal, I drew some patterns on. The patterning is a little bit different, but again, you'll see that. I'll explain that in the Patreon video. And yeah, cutting it out with a small pair of sharp scissors as well. I always do recommend using that just because it's a lot easier to control and get it in between the pile of the faux fur. Rather than using big scissors and actually risking cutting the actual pile. So yeah, a little bit of a different technique than I use normally, but I'm still sort of refining it because it's not my favorite sort of technique, but and it takes a lot longer to do as well. So again, not my favorite technique when it's time consuming, but it gives great results. So yeah, I'll definitely continue to refine it. Anything that I do to sew it up, I use a ladder stitch. I have a video on my channel if you want to know how to sew a ladder stitch. I use faux fur for that video, so it's specific to faux fur as well if you are unsure how to do a ladder stitch. And faux fur is quite forgiving as well, so you don't need to be too pedantic about hiding seam lines and stuff as well, because chances are it'll be covered by faux fur anyway. And for this particular one, I used quite a thick thread for this. I've been using a thicker thread when I'm doing hand sewing like this. It's an upholstery thread, and I seem to only have black colouring, but I'm not actually too sure where to get it. I'm sure your local like haberdashery store has it in stock somewhere in their upholstery section, but I find the stronger thread is really good for achieving patterns and curves and stuff like that, so I highly recommend getting a thick thread for faux fur. Alright, so after I finished the butt, I did a couple of experiments about the chest area, so again, that'll be over on my Patreon. I did a lot of experimenting and I was pretty happy with the way it turned out, so if you want to know how I did that, you can head over to my Patreon. It should be up this week. But it's gonna look something along the lines of this, so you can see it really does look like a gorilla chest, and I got the nipples right. The nipples turned out well, I should say. So yeah, again, it'll be over on my Patreon, so if that's something that you're interested, head over there. It's full format, $5 and up tiers. Link will be in my description box. And I'll also go through adding it to the body. I'm sure you can understand the concept here, but I'll do a full video on it in my body video that will be on Patreon as well, but I'm sure you can get the idea from this little snippet anyway. But just to mention, I spent quite a few hours sewing up this doll. I did it all by hand, so there was quite a lot of hours spent on this doll and this body, not only because it was a hand sewing, but it was also a learning concept as well, so that made it just go a little bit extra long, but happy with the way it turned out. So once everything's sewn up, I do the same deal with my regular dolls. Glue it with a tacky fabric glue. This one is from Spotlight here in Australia. Again, you can get it from a local craft store. It's just a tacky fabric glue and it's usually clear, and I think it works really well for attaching faux fur to resins and polymer clay. Right, so the next thing I wanted to show is bums. So I wanted to get the butt right on this gorilla because I kind of find it funny. So what I did is I got a piece of that thick thread that I've been using to sew up the doll, and I just sort of threaded it through where the bum area is and pulled it tight. And I did that a couple of times just to make sure I get a nice deep crevice on the bum. So the beauty of using that thick thread means that you can pull it quite tight and tie it off. So I did it a couple of times using that thread. It's a little bit difficult to get the actual needle through, so just be wary of not to lose the needle inside the body. I mean, you'll be able to get it out if you sort of press the body and force it out, but yeah. It's maybe you could find a longer needle somewhere in the shop. That's something that I'd like to look into is if there's longer needles. But yeah, I thought it worked really well. And you can also sort of fabric sculpt the faux fur when you're trimming it as well, just to give the more of an illusion of a bum. And just remember just to pull out the pile as well, and then you can give it a trim when you're happy with the way it looks. I've never done a bum before, so it's a new concept to me, because I haven't made a primate or a monkey or anything before, so I'd definitely like to try some more bums. But yeah, I think it's a really good idea to fabric sculpt some things and sort of elaborate on it when you're trimming the faux fur as well. Alright, so I wanted to give you a little look at what it looks like all sewn up, but without a trim or without any faux fur applied to anything. So it looks a little bit like this, so I'll give it a little bit of a trim, and then add some faux fur. So I'm going to be adding it to the head, and also the hands and feet as well, just to refine it a little bit more and just add a little bit more bulk to the hands as well, and also the feet. And the furring takes a little bit long as well, but in this instance it was quite quick, so there was only a small surface area to cover. And then you have something like this. I decided to add the fur to the head before I trimmed it, just so I could trim it all universally and it will sort of turn out a bit smoother. So I tend to do that now more than trimming it first. But here you can get a little smack on the bum, but yeah, you can get a little look of how I've trimmed it and a close-up of the head. I really like the way the hair came out on top of the head. I think it looks very gorilla-like, so pretty happy with the way that looks. Moving on to adding the Silverback. So I'm going to be using this Neo Opaque by Jacquard paint. It's a fabric paint, and I decided to use a brush at this time over an airbrush, just because I wanted to just do a small area and apply a thicker amount, just because of that Silverback. And I did a little test on a piece of scrap faux fur in the first place, and I was pretty happy with the way it turned out. So I'm just brushing it on using just a brush, not a fancy brush or anything, but I just wanted to get the surface of the faux fur and not the base of it, because I wanted the black to come through the base. Because when you look at a Silverback color, you can see that it's black underneath with a little silver on top. So once that's been all applied, I can then run a comb through it, and that way it gets out all the knots and distributes the paint a little bit more, and also softens up, because you can risk being a bit crunchy, but when you comb it through, it stops. So that's pretty much it. for this particular doll. There's a couple of little pictures on here, but if you want to see more pictures, there's a couple on my Facebook and then even more on my Patreon as well. But yeah, really happy the way this turned out. This was a commission, so it's not for sale, but I do have more dolls in my store. Thanks to my Patreons for supporting me. I really do appreciate it. If you want to support me, you can head over there. Link is in the description, and you can also check me out on Instagram and Facebook at Creatures of Nat, and my shop at creaturesofnat.com, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye!